Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out a podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Marcos Mendez, who's a partner here at the firm, a true negotiation tactician and architect. Also joining us today is our guest, Brian Nelson. Brian is currently a chief revenue officer at Client Circle, and no doubt has some stories, expertise, and opinions to share. And as always, we'll just keep it fun, relaxed, and casual. Brian, if you're open to it, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us just a little bit about your career and your background so the listeners can get just a flavor of your negotiation experience. Also, maybe if you can just let us know at what point in your career did you discover the importance of negotiations and actually start to take it seriously. So, Brian, we're extremely excited to have you here with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to brag about yourself for a minute and also chat about when negotiations became important to you. And for the record, this is the host requesting that you brag. So you're kind of being pressured into it, which means your humility remains intact. Okay. To you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. So I have a very, believe it or not, long career in sales and marketing. I think I did a count the other day, and it was 23 years in sales and marketing, about 14 of those leading sales teams. And how I started is I didn't want to be a salesperson. I wanted to be a musician. So I moved to Chicago, and I was doing at that time it was an inside sales associate is what the title was, which was actually what we would equate to an SDR now.
Sure.
So I was setting appointments for salespeople during the daytime, and then I was going and playing music gigs at night. And I remember at a point in my life, I think I had Ritz crackers and ketchup just to eat, and rent was due at the end of the week. And my boss could tell I was pretty stressed out. And he brought me aside. He said, listen, he says, you're pretty good at the sales thing. You should maybe think about it more as a career. He says, I don't know how being a musician's going, but he says, it's probably not going to go as well as your sales career. And I took offense to that at first, but it turns out he was right. He was great. And so from there, I actually took on sales, did a lot of account executive type selling. And I had a great opportunity to get into electronic component type sales, which I did in Chicago, and did to companies like Motorola and Philips, things of that nature, and then moved into defense and aerospace. And that's where I learned that negotiation was really important. Because we were talking about some larger long-term deals, very high dollar prices. And that's where it kind of smacks me in the face that when you get into very long sales cycles and very complex, and there's a lot of things at stake, like, some of the things I worked on had to do with missiles. And sure. When you deal with missiles, there's two main things. You don't want it to go off when you're not planning it to, and when you want it to, you want the missile to work. So
I get a Brian. It's just so funny to hear in everyday life somebody say, "So the thing about missiles."
Yeah, missiles.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Really key that they work when you want them to, right?
And don't when you don't. Yeah.
And don't when you don't. And so when you're getting into that level of discussions, it's really nice to know what you bring to the table, what you need out of the deal, different things like that. So that was a while ago. That was probably 12 years ago that I was involved in those types of conversations. But that was not the first time, but the really I would say, very apparent that negotiation skills and tactics played into how this whole deal was going to shake out and whether if it was actually going to come to fruition. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was actually a great answer. So, I mean, given that you were negotiating where the stakes were high, right? I mean, that's fair to say, not only figuratively in the sense of the business deals, but the items that were and sometimes included in part of the negotiation, a missile, right? I mean, these were some of them were pretty high pressure situations. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. And um, literally, I was having meetings, and there were, rocket scientists in the room, and I felt like I was the stupidest person in the room. And then you could see that there were just a lot of moving parts and complexity, and you're always wondering, okay, and you're trying to figure out what are the things that are nice to haves
Mm.
and what are the things like this absolutely needs to do this, or there's nothing's going to happen here. And I mean, we're talking about, you know, hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to different organizations, and it got very complex where there was a political aspect to think about.
Hmm.
There's just so many things, and that's when I really started, like, my eyes were opened almost all at once. Wow, you really have to know the dynamics of the deal to know, oh, that's something we can bend on, or that's a negotiating type thing that we can work out, and know where the hard line was. Like, no, it absolutely needs to do this, or else there's no deal at all. So,
Well, let me first say I completely respect the fact that you can be in a room filled with rocket scientists and have anything to contribute. Because I can tell you that this guy here, I'd have nothing to say. I would be the
yeah.
most useless person in the room with those folks. I can tell you that. So I respect that a lot. Um, I want to, given that, some of those were high pressure and you talked about politics related to it. I assume that could mean politics in the world. Were you also referring to sometimes, internal stakeholders, like some of those politics as well?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot there, but there are. Um, I think anybody who's done sales understands that it's not just on the surface about, like, hey, we're gonna make this deal happen because it's a good tool for the company to use, but you also have to think about who's buying it and all their motivations for buying it, because there's a lot of emotion there. And I think you guys understand that if this goes correctly, they can look like a hero, or they can be a
Mm.
hero, and they can bring a lot of value to their own organization. If this goes really bad, it can look really bad for them. And so you have to understand what's their skin in the game. It can be a bad financial situation for them, or a bad decision, and that can actually follow them for, hopefully not the rest, but a period of their career. So they're not only making these decisions just in for, like, is this good for the company or not, but they're making the decisions on, how does this make me look
Mm.
internally, right? Why do I want to do this? And I think part of negotiation, especially for a salesperson, is understanding that dynamic, and being aware of it during it. Like, what type of impact is this having on their reputation, not only what the tool is for the organization.
Well, you're hitting on a couple of core principles that I want to have Marcos chat about here with the Maker Group. For sure, we talk about that internal alignment, and we also talk about giving the other party, a victory speech so that they can look good. So I want to turn over to Marcos to hear some of his thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. I think, Brian, you hit on, I think a piece that people miss often in these negotiations. It's so easy to get focused on the commercial terms, the numbers, like the size of the deal, and you sometimes forget the human element. So you calling out, like, what is that underlying narrative that either makes people want to step up and be that hero, or what is maybe driving them to be risk averse? And that stuff is sometimes on the surface and apparent, but oftentimes it's not. So I'm just curious, Brian, on, what suggestions, what experience, what tips you would have on getting underneath that narrative to unpack some of that, like uh, influencing factors in a negotiation.
Great question.
Yeah, good question. And there's a ton of different techniques and tactics to use to get to that, right? But uh, I think some of them are laid out really well in some different sales books. You know, I know one of the ones that I like recently is Gap Selling by Keenan. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it tells you to dig a little bit deeper. And usually, if you just get past those two levels of surface of, hey, why are you interested in this, or you're looking for, usually you're solving an issue or you're solving a problem, or you're trying to, and really, what you want to get into is what is the outcome you're trying to get to, and what's the impact of that. And if you can go a layer deeper, is what is the impact to you? Whoever is buying that, who's ever signing off on it, it might be multiple people, but what is the impact to you? And I've had people avoid the question before. I've also had the opposite, where they almost open up and they say, oh man, if we could actually do this or automate this process, I would be able to drive home at 3:00 and pick my daughters up from school every day. And that would be huge to me. Oh, okay. Why are you doing this? Well, I mean, that would be a huge benefit. We're doing it because of A, B, C, and D. But for me, I would feel like I'm connecting with my daughters more because I would be there when I'm picking them up from school. I had no clue going into it that would be the impact, but I know what it means to them all of a sudden. Or it could be, hey, if I'm able to save this amount of money, that means we would hit our goal for the year. And it would mean, maybe it's a money thing. Maybe it's hey, I'm looking to get a promotion. Maybe it's I really need to have my team focused on these other things, but we have to free up time. And that's where it gets, I hate to use that term political, but it's like, what are the motivating factors that people have? And there's a lot of personal reasons why they're doing things on top of organizational. And if you can get into those personal motivating factors and layer them with organizational motivating factors, if you can get that deep, I will tell you that you have just doubled your chances, or maybe even tripled, of winning that deal over your competitors. And it has nothing to do with, hey, I have a better product. It has to do with, I understand you more than the others, right? So that's how I really feel.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the things that you're touching on too there is that I think that, and this is one of the things that the Maker Group talks about, that we all tend to negotiate from our own perspective, right? We look at the things that it is that we want and we need and what we place value on, versus putting or trying to understand, peel back those layers of what the other party has value. We might value the same thing very differently. Marcos, I know that's a big baked into the DNA of kind of what you're out there training folks on. Can you talk about that for a minute? The differences of perception and value?
Yeah, I think you teed it up well, Matt. And, I come back to something Brian started with, which is there are things in a deal that are nice to have. There are things that are must have, and the hard lines. And, one of the simple questions you might ask a client when we work with them, when we engage, is what are those must have elements for you that we're going to draw that hard line? What does success look like? What is off limits? Pretty foundational, simple question. But what we find often is it's hard for people to answer that. They haven't done the work of really conceptualizing and thinking through it. And if you go back to some of the internal, politics that Brian mentioned, just think about getting to a place on your own side of the table, forget the other party, of what does good look like, what's in, what's out, what's a nice to have versus a must have. You might have to corral different people, different functions, different leaders in that conversation. and they all have that hidden agenda Brian's talking about. They all have different motivations. They all have different styles. So sometimes just getting to those decisions, it's a simple question. It's a very clear focus. There's a lot of things that you got to wade through in order to get there. And that perspective piece is probably the biggest one of understanding what's driving people's behavior.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Brian, quick question for you, off topic a little bit. You're our first former or current musician we've ever had. What instrument did you play or did you sing?
I played saxophone, and I played it in a bunch of blues and jazz and rock bands around Chicago, and it was very fun. I always tell people it was the best time of my life that I never want to do again. Yeah, it was a great time when I did it. It was hard. It was hard paying that Chicago rent and trying to be a musician, but it was good.
You did have ketchup, so let's not complain too much, Brian. Okay.
I had ketchup and Ritz crackers, so I always had a meal.
Fair enough. Talking a little bit about fear in negotiations. When you think about folks on a team headed into a negotiation, there's fear there sometimes. What has your experience been with seeing people having fear, and what does that fear normally center around? Like, what have you seen be the cause of that fear in negotiations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think Marcos kind of alluded to it before. Is that I've seen it mostly comes from a lack of preparation. I just see it repeated over and over again. It's funny because there's so much education out there now, even with what you guys are doing at the Maker Group of how to negotiate. It's a learned skill. You can really learn how to get good at this. I'm amazed at how many people don't take advantage of it. There's a lot of great resources out there, and that you can even practice it. So I think the first thing is lack of preparation. Mm-hmm. That leads to fear. So they don't really know the ins and outs of the deal. Maybe they don't know the motivations of the customer very well, or whoever you're negotiating with. So that leads you to kind of go down this rabbit hole of what ifs. Mm-hmm. And the what ifs, I've seen it with a lot of, even myself and a lot of the people I've managed and coached over the years, is they get to this point where the fear, the funniest one I think is you're at the end of the sales, the sales cycle, and you're negotiating, and the negotiations are honestly, they're pretty small. But if their fear overcomes, they're going right to, they're going to say no. What if they say no? And I go, they would have said no a long time ago. I said, it's not like a big, dramatic, I don't know, if you guys ever watch that show Succession or something like
sure.
that. Sure.
Yeah, of course.
All of a sudden, no, like I said, it's usually not that dramatic. It doesn't mean it couldn't be, but it's not like you're going to say one wrong thing and then they're going to be like, no deal, and slam the table and walk out. It's typically not like that. So I think they, when they're not prepared and they don't really know ins and outs, that leads to a lot of fear, and it leads them to go to extremes. And it also leads them to, I've seen what probably happens most is people leave money or they leave things on the table because they just want to get to the yes. They just want to get it done. And their fear is letting them, let more of the negotiation just happen rather than controlling it than really needs to happen. And I especially see that with money in contract sales. Money's being left on the table, and that's because either they're scared they're just going to say no, so they want to get it done and get to a yes as quickly as possible, or even they're exhausted.
Yeah.
Some of these sales cycles can be, 12, 18, sometimes 2 years. And really, by the end of it, you'll agree to anything just because you're exhausted.
You
and
want it over.
Yeah, it's more of a feeling of if you've ever closed one of those long-term deals when you're excited about it, but honestly, when those would happen for me, I'd have a feeling more of relief than anything.
Check.
Yeah.
Checked out, like that box is checked. Thank you. Can have that part of my day back. Yep.
Right. So what I always tell people when they go into a deal is you have to prepare, and you got to prepare because it gives you three things. Because I was thinking about this, and I call them three of my own C's. But one is calm. So if you're prepared, it naturally, you're calmer. You're calmer when you come down, and you seem to slow down. The process slows down a little bit because everybody thinks a negotiation is like kind of a heightened, like, oh my gosh. And
the movies, that's how the movies show it. Yeah,
exactly. That's how the movies, and people talk faster. They're
a
little bit nervous.
Yeah.
So just calm it all down, right? There's nobody standing there with a stopwatch in the corner. It gives you confidence, right? So you come across as more confidence. The more you know about the deal and the more intricacies you know and the more confident you are, it's just those almost work hand in hand, calm and confidence. And then the last one that I always tell people is clarity. So you got to be prepared so you can be clear internally about what you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
You also have to be clear externally to who you're talking to about what you want or what you need and what they need. That has to be absolutely clear, because if there's confusion there, the negotiation will take way too long, or that won't be good at all. And it also gives you the ability to be efficient with words. People talk a lot during negotiations. And I think one reason is they're just trying to find a good way to say something. And if you are absolutely clear about certain things, or you know what you want, you can put it in a very succinct, efficient way, which makes the negotiation just go so much better, and everybody is on the same page at the same time.
I think we've all been in those calls before. You're talking to your credit card company or whomever, and you have the employee on the other end of the line who just kind of doesn't know what to say. So they just start saying things, right? Like they'll repeat this, I'm going to transfer you. They'll say it 20 different times, because they just don't know what else to say. So to your point, that's really valid. Marcos, one of the things that we talk about at the Maker Group is in terms of fear, or people's fear of being uncomfortable. People's fear of, confrontation. And we talk a lot about becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right, Matt. And I love those three C's, Brian: calm, confidence, clarity. And the point that Brian ended on, where we're talking a lot, I tend to link that to that discomfort, Matt, that you just mentioned. When people are uncomfortable, they need to soothe themselves some way. And one way that it often comes is just, let me just continue to talk and fill the gaps, fill the silence, try to connect in some way.
Yeah. So in addition to all that, to pre-planning and thinking through your strategy, also learning and expecting moments of discomfort, right? And so that when they come along, you're prepared to just kind of work through them. And the old adage, of course, by Mike Tyson, right? Brian, do you know that one by chance?
Yeah, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, except that it's funny to say, but the reality is, in a good winning strategy, as Marcos and the team talk about often, even after you get punched in the face, you still have to try to, you do need to pivot or add a little bit of that art, but you still stay in motion. Speaking, Brian, about kind of the art and science of it, there's a lot of schools of thought out there with negotiations being Some lean a bit heavier towards art, a bit heavier towards science in terms of how they perceive it. Where do you think that balance lies? Do you think it is more one or the other, or do you think it's a pretty even mix of both art and science?
Man, that's a good question.
I'm asking a sales guy this too, so you know.
Yeah, right. I would say it's a little bit of both. However, there's some really good psychology books out there. Actually, I'm in the middle of reading one right now, and psychology is a science to a certain extent, and I think what you have to do is there is an art to this whole thing. I really believe that, but it's kind of the art of being able to read a personality and read a situation. Everybody's going to negotiate differently. The magic is to figure out, what are you dealing with? What is the situation? And so the quicker you can look at body language, understand the subtleties of, if during negotiation, I always think it's funny because people might speak in not absolutes, but generalities, or that means there's a lot open there. That means they're kind of like, hey, throw me a pitch. Maybe I'll hit it. Maybe I not. If it's kind of that feel, okay, maybe you got some room. Maybe they're here to like, hey, I've never thought of this before. Throw out a completely different idea. Sometimes you go in and it's, sentence, period. Okay. And then you got to look at.
Those people were trained by Maker.
Right. Exactly. Sentence, period. Okay. Where is the room here?
Sure.
And thing like that. I think there's a little bit of an art to that, to being able to just really figure out people. And then it gets into the science of just the pure mechanics of a conversation and being able to know where they stand and to evaluate that. And then you can apply some different, I hate to say it, it's not like a game or a trick, but psychology tactics to see, you suggest something or you say something in a certain way. And then really, instead of what they say, watch their face. That's what I used to do, is watch their face, right? Did it look like something painful happened to them? I've had that happen where everybody goes, Or,
swing and a miss.
Yeah. Did they become more open? Do they get a pleasant look on their face? Are they intrigued? What do their eyes do? What does their face do? That will tell you a lot. If you get really good at that, I remember when I was, funny story, when I was a musician, I was trying to make money. One of my very first jobs was, you went out on the street, you walked around, and you tried to convince people to buy White Sox ticket packages, because the White Sox weren't doing that good in Chicago at that time. So they actually would contract different salespeople around the city, and you would sell these ticket packages. So it was the most awkward sell, whatever. But you'd walk up to people and say, "Hey, do you want to go see a White Sox game?" Hopefully, they're a White Sox fan, and you would talk to them, and I would notice that when you'd get them to sign something, I had a pen in my hand, and I would be explaining these things and going down this thing with my pen. And I started doing I'd bring my pen up and go like this. They were watching my pen. Like, they were totally distracted by what I was doing with my pen. They weren't even following. And then I'd bring them back to reality and be like, I don't think that person listened to anything I said. They were more interested in what the movement was here. And my point of that is really, you can psychologically get people to focus on something when there's a lot going on around them, but focus in on something if you do it the correct way. And maybe that becomes the point that you close the deal or something else happens, is if you get them to focus in a certain area, and not to take advantage of them or anything. But if we really got to get it down to, hey, this is the one area that's keeping us from getting this done, let's focus on that. There's some different things psychologically that you can do to that. And that was kind of a good learning experience, because it taught me that everybody's going to say yeah, or they'll say uh-huh. My kids do that all the time. I'm explaining something to them, they're like, yeah, Dad, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, you're not getting any of this. So we as humans automatically do that. We'll say yes or accept a lot or do a lot of this. It's not really there. So
some strategies to kind of direct attention to some of the things that might be important to you, some of your motivators. In all fairness to the stories about Chicago, I mean, it was Chicago. They might have thought you had a weapon in your hand. You know what I mean?
They might have. It was kind of creepy at that time, but yeah.
Marcos, the combination that Brian is talking about with art and science, at the Maker Group, there's the advantage of seeing negotiations across multiple different industries at multiple different levels within teams. What do you see in terms of that balance between negotiations as an art and a science?
I fall where Brian does, which is it's both. It feels like the easy answer, but it is true. In my experience, there is science and psychology that you should understand as an underpinning of some core tenets, some core principles in negotiation. But the piece that Brian hit on, which is we negotiate with people, and that's where the art comes into play. And too often I see people that they buy into one psychological principle or one theoretical principle of negotiation, and they just want to apply that blindly to every single situation. And if you're doing that, you're not reading the other side. You're not doing some of the stuff that Brian talked about earlier of getting underneath motivation. So to me, it's got to be both. Know the science, know the principles, but apply them in a creative way, apply them with applying the art of the moment. So that's how I typically view it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's so many other examples out there in life too of how anything, right? I think we find that if we have one strategy for anything that we do, well, this works, let me stick with this every time, bound and determined that that's going to fail, right? So it's about applicability to each situation. That makes perfect sense. Brian, moving on to, it's one of my favorites. I want to talk about ego. You strike me as the kind of guy who's pretty chill and humble and relaxed, musician. But talking about, have you seen a lot of ego in negotiations, and, how big of a detriment do you think it is to both sides?
Wow. Yeah. First of all, yes. What's funny is I think I do come across as pretty relaxed and chill, which is great.
Yes, sir.
I have an ego. Absolutely. I think a lot of salespeople do, or sales leaders, and I think you're lying to yourself if you say you don't.
Sure.
I have made the mistake of bringing my ego to negotiations. I've also seen it done. Ego is an interesting thing because it can be very empowering. I think where it gets detrimental in a negotiation is when you're making decisions based on your pride and your ego more than the logic. And I've seen it get in the way a lot of times because just of who you are, or I always think of, what was it? I was negotiating something the other day, and it was a relatively small thing. It was for like a monthly subscription thing or something. And, honestly, I liked the service. I thought it was great and everything, but, cause I thought the price was a little high, I kind of brought my ego into it, and I could tell I wasn't in the consumer, hey, Brian hat. I put on my CRO hat during it, and I just totally flattened the person on it. It wasn't the right thing to do, and I don't think the negotiation went better. I got my way, but I don't think it wasn't better, especially, and I was thinking of that. I was like, if I had to have them as a customer now and have a long-term relationship with them after doing this, it would be bad. So what you have to think about during negotiations is what you're bringing to the table, but what happens after the negotiation's done? If it's done and you're going to work together, okay, what is that partnership look like now? And I have to be careful with that. If I come in with the big hammer and say it's my way or the highway, and the whole thing is set upon that, well, it's probably not a very good start to a partnership. They're probably, the talk behind the back is, well, Brian's hard to deal with, right? Or they're not very flexible, or they're not great to work with. And that's just because in that moment, I let my ego kind of take control. I see that a lot, to where maybe title and ego, and to where we've all gotten our careers, play into the factor of, no, I don't have to bend, or I don't have to do that just because of who I am. But there's no real business case for it. So I think ego is a good thing. I think it's, if you're human, you have an ego. Let's be honest. It can be detrimental if your motivating factors are based out of who you are or who you think you are. I think you got to keep it at a real level.
A desire, yeah, with the ego, maybe a desire to win, quote unquote, more than a desire for the best possible outcome. Right. Before I turn it over to you, Marcos, to some perspective, I don't know if you guys have seen that show, American Pickers, but, they travel the countryside and they're negotiating, on items that's in somebody's garage and whatnot. And always it's this give and take, right? One item, their margin's a little higher. The other item, they give the other person a little more to establish that trust and rapport in the relationship. So, Marcos, I know you talk a lot about laying the foundation in negotiations for long-term relationships. Do you see ego sometimes as an impediment to that?
Yeah, I think, like Brian, it's the very nature of people, and to his point, if we're saying it's not coming into the equation, we're probably not being truthful. Where I think I've seen ego get in the way the most, because we deal a lot with these really complex, big picture deals, when there is a personal pride or a personal objective that potentially clouds the judgment of the overall long-term picture. So an example of that might be, someone wanting to make their year, make their quarter, make their month, and really push hard because of that. And they lose sight of the fact, what Brian said, I need to do business with this party in the future. And if I really drive a difficult conversation here at the onset, what can that do in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I've witnessed that too, for sure. The value of the groundwork that you lay will come back very strongly one way or another down the road if you continue to work with that person. So that makes perfect sense. Brian, I want to grab a couple more questions here because I'm really loving a lot of your thoughts. So topic that's out there for in a whole bunch of different ways, a whole bunch of different industries, and quite frankly, humanity in general. Let's talk about AI for a minute. I think that anybody who claims to know the answers to any of this is probably has an ego, right? Speaking about ego, but I'd love to hear your opinion on AI in negotiations in the sense of anything you want. Do you think it's ethical? Do you think it's useful? Do you foresee it becoming a big part? With the caveat that your guess is as good as anybody else's right now. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's AI questions. I love them. I always think about, like, is Skynet real and is the Terminator coming? And I get a lot of those questions.
Yeah.
So I personally like AI.
Yep.
I think it can be, my personal opinion, and who knows, right? I would love a crystal ball, but I think it's been a useful tool. And I think in the negotiation, the more data that you can get, the better off you're going to be. especially both parties. So I don't think it's as a negative thing. I think it's a tool that's at your fingertips, and I'm going to be honest, it's not going away.
Yeah.
So I think we need to use this to the best of our advantage. And I know a lot of people are worried about jobs in the future and things. I think AI is going to create jobs, but I think how the best way to do it is see it as a useful tool to enhance what we're doing. And I think it can make negotiations better. Where negotiations go bad really is that clarity piece. That's why I say that. People aren't clear about understanding each other, and they're not even clear about what they really want. I'm shocked at how many big deals fall apart because people just kind of don't even know what they wanted when they got into it. Maybe they got brought into the call, or maybe it's just, and they come into it and they've never really thought through, like, what is the walk away point? What is exactly do we want to get out of this? That hasn't been defined. So if you can use AI as a tool to help you get there faster, I'm all for it. And that's how I look at it. And that's how, honestly, my team uses it today.
Okay. Yeah. And before we have Brian chat with us a little bit about his current project and what he's doing over at Client Circle, Marcos, what's the general chatter out there in the corporate ethos that you're hearing amongst leaders about AI, or even your own opinions on it?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is similar to what Brian mentioned. There's this mixed excitement and fear. Excitement of how it can change our lives for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of how much power or change is coming. So it does feel like one of these crucial moments where, to Brian's point, it's not going away. If you're not playing with it, ideating, thinking about problems it can solve, and how it's going to be incorporated in our day-to-day life, you're probably going to be left behind pretty quickly. So I'm doing the same. I'm diving in. I'm learning all I can, but it's going to be one of these things that it's fast moving, and we'll have to just get on that train and see where it takes us.
Yeah, and before we dive into Client Circle, to say one funny thing I saw on LinkedIn a few days ago, I think it went viral if anybody else saw it, but there was this big building, and stop me if you know this already, but there was this big building being constructed, and all wrapped around the building, the construction workers put this huge sign almost the size of the building that said, "Hey, Chat GPT, come finish this building." Right? So it's important to remember that there are still things that have not yet happened. So I think we are at the crux of it. A shifting of the next version of ourselves, like the internet and the iPhone, et cetera. But yeah, it's not here to take us all over yet. So, Brian, with that being said, love to hear you chat a little bit about what's happening with you and with Client Circle in general. I think I saw, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Client Circle either previously was a part of or had something to do with Rocket Referrals. Is that right? So I'd love to hear all about your project over there.
Yeah, so Client Circle rebranded to Client Circle from Rocket Referrals, and I'll explain why that happened. So what Client Circle does is they're a leading U.S. Marketing and communications platform for insurance companies.
Okay.
And that's how we grew. We've been around about 10 years, and as the platform has evolved, we have been a lot more to our customers rather than just referrals. It started out as a good referral platform, and we've become this full circle, almost CRM of sorts that helps our clients manage their customer journeys. They improve retention. They improve net promoter score. They still automate cross-selling. They build websites. They do all these really cool things on our platform for client retention, automation, messaging. So Client Circle was a much better name for us to where we are now. And so we rebranded, right? So it's still the same company, still a great two brothers co-own the company, and they're awesome. I love working for them. And where we're headed is just a lot of growth. And really, so we've been very successful in the insurance space, but our platform has evolved so much that we offer a huge value to anybody who has clients in the US, which is a lot of people. But if you are managing and messaging and worried about client retention, and it's just a huge task and you can't keep on top of it, that's what our platform enables you to do. And it's really like a specialized platform for almost like franchises who have to manage a large number of clients and keep in front of them. That's what we do really well, exceptionally well, above and beyond other CRM platforms out there.
Yeah, I got to say, I spent some time on your website yesterday evening to kind of prep for the call today. And that's what struck me is it looked like I saw, of course, a focus on insurance, but then I saw its applicability to the rest of the market. And, checking out the website, it really struck me as a 360-degree holistic approach to anybody who needs that. I mean, is that what the intention of it was?
Yeah, I think it fit really well in the insurance space. And that's really been our focus. But the technology and where it's headed, and actually it's funny, we just talked about AI. We've incorporated some AI to help our customers use.
I was in that meeting listening, sir.
Were you really? Okay. Okay. Yeah, we really have done some really cool things like websites. You can build your own website in our platform, but really we have something called Circle AI, which is our artificial intelligence platform that we've built in, and you can just say, here's what I want the content to be on my website, and it will create it for you. And you can choose whether you want it to be more friendly, more professional, whatever, but you don't have to create that yourself. You can use the tool to do that so you can get back to what you're doing. When we talk to insurance agents, most of them, they want to engage with their clients and they want to sell insurance, right? They don't want to build website content. That's not what they're good at.
Sure.
But they do need it to be good. So that's what we offer. And when I go into more different companies, so right now we have one of our largest customers is a global 1,000 location worldwide franchise operation that's not an insurance agency. We help them manage their clients.
1,000 location?
1,000 locations.
Wow. Okay.
And they have a lot of clients that they have to stay in touch with, even from like automated birthday cards that they get.
Sure.
And different things like that. So their client retention is very important to them. So really we fit for anybody where landing clients and then keeping them engaged is important. That's where we fit. I know that's a huge audience, but if that sounds like you or somebody you know, give me a call. We would love to talk to them.
Yeah, for sure. And the name of that is Client Circle. And I can tell you just to wrap up here that, in my 20s, I had spent a couple years in the insurance industry. That's complicated. So if Client Circle can have that kind of success in an industry like that, they probably can do it in any other industry. That is a complicated job, sir.
Right.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Thank you.
So, Marcos, any closing thoughts or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just a thank you to Brian, and I think a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge dropped on us today through his experience. So appreciate the time, Brian, and walking us through some of the things you learned along the way. I'll take away that 3C of calm, confidence, and clarity. I think it's a good message for any salesperson.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Brian, how much I truly appreciate your time. And, don't be surprised if one day you get an email asking for, maybe a little sample of that saxophone going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
yeah, it's been a while though.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure you can still play better than me. So do you have anything else you want to add, Brian?
No, I really appreciate it. This has been a great podcast. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about one of my favorites is negotiations and sales and everything. I love what you guys do at the Maker Group, and just excited.
Yeah, you definitely brought a lot to it, and you were a gentleman, so thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Okay, cool.